The barriers of entry to VR have been falling every year, and right now I think the four biggest barriers are price, portability, library of games, and nausea. I think, and we can go into depth on some of those later on, but those are the four main barriers of entry. And I think that the Steam frame is poised to completely eliminate at least two of those four, and with any luck, and given the fact that it's as of yet unreleased, it may be able to address at least part of the other two as well. I think it's weird because not a lot of people are talking about it. I don't think there's a lot of excitement around this, and for me, that comes as a bit of a surprise. That's kind of the premise of this video. The premise is simple. Steam is using a technology called foveated streaming to essentially, in a nutshell, allow any game to be played in VR. And it basically means that developers won't have to worry about optimizing for something specifically like the Oculus Quest. You know, like you can just design a PC VR game and it'll work natively on the Steam frame. And on top of that, more interesting to me is the fact that they have this PCIe port that you can add your own peripherals and modify according to whatever you'd like to do. And I think that this is both indicative of where, as a company, Valve are going, but also tangibly investing in the potential for the community to show them what they want to see as well. Moreover, I think that it's indicative of a desire to build towards whatever that computing platform of the future might be. Specifically, in my opinion, spatial computing and neural, or at least brain augmented interfaces, right? That's the most exciting thing for me, given the fact that right now we're using our little meat tubes to interact with our digital worlds, whereas I think that, well, useful and definitely a very important part of our interaction with the world at large as a species, I think that using our brains is like it's a really exciting thing for me. But anyway, let's talk about the video proper. This will likely be a video on its own at some point, but I believe humans, and I think most people would agree with me, have a really weak or they have a really weak grasp on or relationship with time. I've been seeing for many years at this point that VR and other technologies are dead. And it's weird because just 20 years ago, if you had told me or any other person on the street that there would be millions of people with a VR headset, I think that would have been a pipe dream. I think people would have laughed at you. Maybe not laughed. I don't think anybody would agree that millions of people would own headsets, let alone tens of millions. And that's where we're at right now. And within just 8 to 12 years, we went through essentially strapping a TV to your face, to having motion controls, to having low latency pass through, to having foveated rendering, and now on the heels of their long awaited hardware announcements and releases, foveated streaming. I think we take for granted the sheer speed at which things are developing because we can't see the hundreds of billions of dollars of investiture, which are essentially abstracted away into nice packaging and marketing campaigns and, glossy advertisements. In addition to the fact that we all grew up in a world where within 60 years, humanity went from not being able to fly to wooden airplanes to literally walking on the moon. Given that, yeah, I understand that 15 years is a, quote, long time. I get it. I grant you that might be the case. But in the scheme of things, 15 years is a blink of a cosmic eye. It's nothing. It's no time at all, let alone for a technology that's been around since the late 70s, mid 70s. I don't know. Like VR is not new. It's been revisited of late, but it's fairly, I hesitate to say mature technology, but it's been around. It's been around the block, and it's had a resurgence, and now I think it's going to this next step, and I think it's very exciting. All this to say what? The TLDR is that I think that the Steam frame could be the most important piece of VR tech yet. So here's how the rest of the video will be split up. Basically 2 parts. The first part is my thesis and reasoning, and the second part is my speculation and hopes. So for that first part, what Steam tackles. Each iteration of VR technology has kind of addressed a specific issue, right? So at first it was just getting something made, just getting something consumer friendly, both price point and hardware point and software point, just getting it usable, right? So that's what Oculus did. Like I said earlier, basically strapping two little screens to your face. And having actually play tested that ages ago, it was rough, in my opinion. It was pretty rough. I did not see the potential in it at the time. And I was much more interested in things like augmented reality and other novel like computer interactions. But VR for me was not where the new wave was. That said, the next thing it was that was addressed was like the screen door effect of like the fat pixels that you could see on the screen, and then motion controls, and then decreasing latency, increasing comfort, decreasing the weight, and crucially getting rid of the cable that basically has you tethered to the computer, right? And that's kind of where we've been bottlenecked until now. Obviously, there are improvements in resolution. There are improvements in materials science and in optics and in software and hardware, of course. But the state of affairs is basically unchanged for the last 5 or so years, I guess. Like since since the Quest 3 came out or whatever. Nothing too nuts has come out. Obviously, Apple tried with the Vision Pro, but it was extremely expensive. And while it did some awesome things with respect to spatial computing, I don't think it's at a point, whether ergonomically, aesthetically, or practically, let alone the price, where the average consumer can get in and actually use it, either for productivity or for fun, right, for leisure. And sure, there are companies that address specific things like resolution or immersion, but VR progress as a whole, in my opinion, has been at a relative standstill, because it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult to fit all that compute onto a mobile package that you have on your face, that's comfortable, that's lightweight, that's cheap, and performant. It's pretty tough. But in terms of first principles, a user doesn't care where the compute happens. A user doesn't even care that compute happens. A user cares about playing their game. A user cares about using their software. If it works, that's enough. That's good enough for them, right? A developer doesn't care. Well, that's not true. A developer definitely cares where the compute happens, but more than anything, they care that the user can use their product, that the user can use their software, their game, their experience, whatever, right? That's ultimately what those two parties care about. So if you can just use the computer to run the game or whatever, and then stream that, fundamentally that eliminates the biggest bottleneck so far, or one of the biggest bottlenecks that we've had so far in terms of VR development, and that's what the Steam Frame is doing. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to use the Steam Frame, and as somebody who has spent easily over 3,000 hours in VR, I've used tons of different headsets, most of them actually, and quite a few peripherals. I think the most important thing about the Steam Frame for me was how unremarkable it was. And if it's not clear, I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as the highest possible praise. It is, simply put, sprezzatura. Okay? Its seamlessness and effortlessness in how you put it on and it just works it feels good. It feels great to just put on the thing and it works just like any other device. And it was extremely comfortable, great resolution, very smooth. It's not like blowing your mind with like clarity and all that. It's nothing like that. It just simply works. And I played Hades 2 on basically a flat screen in VR, and it has a pass-through mode as well. But it has if you've ever played big screen, it's kind of like that, but kind of closer to you. So it's like a big TV, and you can either do it like in VR or in mixed reality, and play your games. You can lie down and play your games. You can basically be sitting in the car and play your games. And it was extremely comfortable, but immediately after playing Hades 2, I stand up and I'm walking around in this big, office space, and I immediately jump into Half-Life Alyx. No cord, no cable, nothing, full resolution, super smooth. It felt great. Felt really nice. And you're playing it basically on a mobile device, and it weighs like as much as your phone. You don't even feel that it's there. And I think that was the coolest thing. It's that you forget that it's even there, It just works, and it works seamlessly with your library. You just plug and play, you know? And I think that's that effortlessness with which you interact with it is the killer app, so to speak. Now that's part of the killer app, I think, but it's a big part of it. Now imagine that with every other title, not just Half-Life Alyx, but like any of your games, you can play them automatically in the Steam frame. I'm not saying in VR, but I am saying like you can play them. But I am saying you could play them in VR. One thing is modding a game to allow it to be played in VR, and another thing entirely is having hardware that gives you the ability to play those games on mobile, essentially, you know? And I think that's what this device is. It should make anybody who likes VR very, very excited. Because now we live in a world, obviously there's been some really cool changes and developments in the VR space in terms of porting games and stuff, but now paired with the Steam frame, you're going to be able to play pretty much any game that you want. Not only like in VR flat, but in VR, you know. I'm not exactly, it's like 2 a.m. for me, so I'm articulating this as effectively as I can in my caveman brain right now, but hopefully you take my meaning. Now, given the current pricing landscape, there's still a pretty large barrier of entry, and that's cost. I don't know what it'll look like. My homies speculate it'll be probably around $1,300. That would hurt. That would hurt quite a bit. I think for most consumers, that would hurt. But when you look at the fact that the Index was around the same price, and plenty of people bought that, yeah, I think I will pick it up without a doubt. But that would hurt. You know, 1,300 is pretty steep. Anyway. That's kind of the thesis right there. That it just kind of works, and it's a step in the right direction in the sense that what they're doing is translation, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more here. So here's my hopes and speculation with respect to the Steam frame as somebody who loves Steam and VR. Firstly, Valve, at least from the outside looking in, don't strike me as a particularly nostalgic company. I think the ethos that's reflected in everything that they do is pushing boundaries, right? If it's not pushing boundaries in some way, if it's not doing something new or unique, and if it's not helping their business in one way or another, the real question invariably becomes, why do it, right? If it's not helping their business, and if it's not pushing a medium forward in some way, who cares, right? So, and I mean, and I agree, I think a lot of people would agree, but when Half-Life first released, they were obviously interested in making the best possible experience that they could. And they ended up making one of the most important titles in gaming history. By the time Half-Life 2 drops, which was the sequel to one of the most consequential games of all time, there was a huge outcry when it was required to have Steam to play Half-Life 2. And despite a tremendously bumpy start, I think the result was legitimizing Steam as the standard, and arguably it laid the foundations for what Steam as a storefront would be and is today. So yeah, from the very start, you know, Valve are building to what technology should be or will be or what they want it to be, obviously for their business, obviously, but in addition to that, for the medium or mediums within which they're operating themselves, right? So if they're working in games as software, like they're trying to push the genres, the mediums forward in a meaningful way, in addition to helping their business. And in fact, I would argue that them doing that is what directly benefits their business. So if from the very start Valve are building what technology should be, not what it is, why make the Index? Why make anything in VR in the first place? And then why double down and then make the first Half-Life title in a month of Sundays be a VR title? And then on top of that, why now, of all times when nobody's talking about VR, and when people are saying VR is dead, right? When there's this dearth of VR content and hype, why make the Steam frame? Well, there are two wolves within me, and both of them huff the hopium that, at the very least, Valve view VR as a legitimate platform for consequential storytelling, gaming, maybe even productivity, and potentially that their final installation of one of the most anticipated series of all time, maybe a game that can be played on PC and VR, and maybe even change based on what you play. Even if that's not the case, right? You guys have to see that right now their ecosystem is rock solid. They have the biggest gaming storefront, a killer portable device. They have their own OS. They have made tremendous headway with Linux, pioneered VR, both hardware and software. And on top of all of that, I think that the least uncharitable thing that I could say about their competition is that they don't really have any. You have to remember that first and foremost, Valve are a software company, right? So they don't build hardware for kicks and giggles. They build it to strengthen their position. And each element that they put together is mutually beneficial. Steam Deck was a huge stepping stone for SteamOS and was a huge blow to Windows' walled garden. And Frame seems directly to counter Oculus, or excuse me, what is it called? It's Meta OS, right? Meta OS, Meta Horizon OS. And it seems to directly counter Meta's OS from cornering the spatial computing market, right? So I guess by running SteamOS backed by FexEmu and Proton, Valve allows PC players to play their games on mobile and Linux, which is nuts. They're essentially investing. I mean, it's a non-trivial amount of effort, right? But what they're doing is basically acting as a force multiplier. They're for every hour that they spend working on, Proton, Fex, they're freeing up hundreds of hours for developers and probably cumulatively thousands or hundreds of thousands of hours of development time from developers, from having to write all these different compatibility layers for people to engage with Steam games, right? So I think actually that's kind of the theme of today's video, right? Herculean effort made to look effortless. Devs don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything. I don't have to do anything. Valve is doing all the hard work. And what they're doing is translation. That's it. So they're translating PC to Linux. They're translating computer to mobile. They're translating desktop to VR. All they're doing is translating, and you and I reap the benefits, right? So by pairing Proton with FexEmu, Valve ensures that whether a title is flat or VR, native ARM or PC streamed, the consumer stays in their ecosystem, right? The consumer stays in their little, I would call it a walled garden, but if it's a walled garden, it's like a public reserve, right? It's open land where you can enter the walled garden at will, and you can plant flowers or whatever. I guess it's not a walled garden, it's just a garden, right? You can enter this ecosystem and participate, and you don't want to leave because they've made it so pleasant to be in, so to speak. And most importantly, the consumers and developers don't really have to do anything. Valve did all the legwork, and they made it look easy. So you and I just keep doing what we're doing, right? Consumers will play the games, developers will develop the games, and Steam does all the heavy lifting in terms of translation, so that all your stuff just works on all of their stuff natively, and you don't have to think about it. You can take it on the go on your Steam Deck. You can play in VR or XR. You can obviously be at your desktop. And I think that is really slept on. So in a sense, I guess the video is not just about the Steam frame, but the Steam frame is the spoon upon which the sugar of this message is being, the medicine of this message is getting shoved down your throats. I don't know where I'm going with that. Like I said, I'm really sleepy, okay? Don't hold it against me. Anyway, so I'm really excited about all that, but I think on top of everything, the most underlooked aspects of the frame is the modding potential with that PCIe port that they're building in. And in the much simpler time of 2016, I put out a video talking about the Emotive Epoch. It's an EEG headset that lets you basically control robots and software. And this sucker was like $800 at the time. It's probably around the same price now. I don't know. I haven't messed with it, but being a broke college student, I was trying to raise money so that I could buy one and play video games with it. At the time, actually, my friends and I, we played a lot of Gmod and TF2. And I always thought it would be sick to play Gmod with like an EEG headset. But, like I said, being a broke college student, that money had to go to more pressing matters, and so you have to pay bills, you have to eat. So that dream was deferred, but it stayed alive, and I find it so exciting that it's not only possible but probable that I or we will potentially have brain augmented VR headsets and devices and experiences that I can potentially be a part of, that we could potentially be a part of creating and working on. So I think that's really, really, I'm very excited about that. And this will likely also be a video of its own, but I really think that the current iteration of, I guess you could call them hand-operated devices, keyboards, mobile, like touchscreens, while beloved by many, I think they're pretty cumbersome and clunky in the grand scheme of things. I think that at some point we're so comfortable with keyboards and touchscreens and things like that that we just stopped moving forward. I feel like the GUI, keyboards, mice, to some extent even screens, were a temporary measure, like a stopgap for a specific use that slowly became standard. Again, we're talking about the blink of a cosmic eye, right? Even 50 years, 80 years of technology, all this stuff just became status quo, became standard, but I don't think it's the ideal, format or interface. I think it just became what was done. And instead of trying to push things forward, it was like, how do we iterate on this and make it better, as opposed to how do we move it forward, right? I think the word here is foveated. That's the word that I'm looking for. So that's exactly what I mean. Foveated. That's today's buzzword. Like, have you ever tried using CAD software? They have to simplify it on some things, like to make it accessible for the layman, right? 3D modeling software, have you used Blender or any like 3ds Max or any of that stuff before? Have you tried to interact with some of these software suites? You have to have like an encyclopedic memory or like knowledge over the course of like a decade built up so that you can interface with some of these things to build something simple, right? Like if I have a piece of clay in my hand, I can just and there we go. Like I have the thing and I can make it. We've been kind of engineered over the course of millennia to do that, right? We've made clay for literally thousands of years, and we've manipulated media with our hands for literally thousands of years. Don't get me wrong. I love keyboards, right? I believe me, I love it. I love my keybs, and I love hardware. I love making that stuff. But at some point, I do think that, like, have you ever used VR for sculpting or, any kind of artistic work? I have. And it's a revelation. I've used it for, anything from like, I hesitate to say CAD software, but it is close. I used it with like NURBS modeling. I used it for like spray painting in King Spray. That stuff goes hard. Doing graffiti in VR is crazy cool. It's really an amazing way of producing art, and I think it's really slept on because this, the keyboard and screen is very comfortable. And I just don't think it hits as well as using your hands, right? So ultimately, I do think that even that isn't the limits of where it is. I don't even think that VR hands and stuff or mixed reality is the limit. And I think there's something ahead of that, which will be, brain interfaces. I do think that it's a double-edged sword and it can be a little scary. But, I think we're far away from write capability. And right now it's mostly read capability. And I think that's all I would really need for what I'm interested in, which is, playing video games and moving robots and things like that. And, I think we're limited, like I said, by our little meat tubes, our little sausage fingers when we're trying to type stuff out or, manipulate digital things with our hands. And if I can move at the speed of thought, I'm no longer bound by the middleman of my, motor skills, right? It's all gray matter. That is, what we think becomes reality anyway, and like an EEG or a neural interface or, brain augmented or brain powered devices just remove the middleman and get straight to that, creation process. And I think ultimately it'll be really cool to see what happens as a result of the Steam frame with respect to all that. Anyway, that's enough yapping. I wanted to make this video for two reasons. A, to do my part to hype people up for the Steam frame. I think it's really exciting, regardless of any of this stuff, this speculation and all this, you know, hopium that I'm huffing. I do think it's exciting, even just as a device. I've been expectant for more VR stuff, more VR news, more VR anything, and it's been, like I said, kind of a valley right now, because the hype is elsewhere, and I'm just pleased that something is happening in this space, let alone something as potentially momentous as I think this will be. And the second reason is just to be able to say, I told you so, for X or Y thing that invariably may or may not. Is that a contradiction? Invariably? Is that invariably may or may not happen? That's a kind of a nothing burger of a phrase, but whatever. Yeah, I'm kind of making the video also just to be able to say, told you so, if it does happen. Regardless of whether or not that happens, I just can't wait to get my hands on it, play with it, and make some cool stuff with it. Especially the you know, the like modding scene. I'm not even just talking about the PCIe thing. I'm talking about like just mods, like adding it to like cosplays and stuff would be so sick. Like, I'm just really excited for it in general, and I think you should be too. That's kind of the long and short of it. So, yeah. See you next time, or not. I don't know.